Welcome to Behind the Headlines, Trends That Shape the News, a T-Biz production. Knowing the underlying trends behind the daily headlines helps tea professionals better interpret the news of the day. I'm Dan Bolton, a lifelong journalist, publisher, and podcast host. I have followed the global tea industry for the past couple of decades. Prior to the pandemic, I traveled 100,000 kilometers or more annually, attending and speaking at professional conferences and gathering information firsthand. The most enjoyable encounters during these travels were in the tea lands, discussing concerns and marveling at the ingenuity and determination of growers, tea blenders, researchers, and traders. Our talks mainly focused on surmounting challenges. The information they provided, generously offered by experts in their own words, is shared in best practices through my publications. Today's presentation is an overview of some of the trends that shape the news. This is one in a series of 15-minute talks on the business of tea. The presentation is accompanied by a series of in depth reports and podcast interviews available free on the Tea Journey and Tea Biz websites. A personal note: Winnipeg, Canada is far from the tea farms, and virtual chat is not the same thing as seeing everyone in person. But sharing news and insights is important, ongoing work. This will have to do. I miss you all and trust we will soon see each other once it's safe. Each day I scan the headlines. I then read, listen, and organize this information to produce T-Biz articles and podcasts. The work of researching and reporting is done by a team of 40 tea writers in 12 countries, many of whom speak the native tongue in their tea land. Each week I begin the T-Biz podcast with a call to hear the headlines. These are typical. Adverse weather lowers yield. Oversupply drives tea auction prices below cost of production. Laborers are angry or absent due to uncertainty about their future. Rising energy and input costs limit return on investment. Do these headlines sound familiar? Repetitious? While specifics vary week to week in every land and in every language, the underlying trends remain the same. Reacting to daily events leads listeners to think that news events shape trends. In fact, only a few underlying trends shape much of the news. In this talk, I describe two trends that are a reflection of consumer behavior. The third is a changing climate. Markets today are volatile and confusing, more so due to the pandemic and changing consumer behavior. The best way to respond locally is to keep the big picture in mind. The final slide will help you see into the future. Let's begin by describing consumer behaviors that strongly favor tea. Trend 1: global demand is strong and rising. Tea consumption grew steadily through the past 2 decades, weathering a global pandemic as deftly as the global recession. During the 10 years since 2016, growth was steady at 4 to 5% per year. Now is forecast to accelerate to an estimated 8% per year. Production will exceed 6.3 million metric tons in 2021. This is sufficient to produce 273 billion liters of tea. Volume will increase to 297 billion liters by 2025, far beyond global totals for coffee, soda, milk, and juice. In 2021, each person will consume nearly 9/10 of a kilo of tea. Global consumption will soon exceed 1 kilo per capita, enough to make each of us 500 cups of tea. Tea is more available today than at any time in history. known for its scientifically proven health benefits, tea, which has been consumed for millennia, is far more popular today with young and old. Packaged tea is one of the fastest growing and the fast moving consumer goods. The greatest gains are in developing countries where tea's healthful properties also offer the greatest benefit. While tea is viewed as a cheap commodity in much of the world, an expanding middle class in emerging markets finds tea culture and the healthy aspects of tea drinking appealing. Spreading the story of tea justifies premium prices and an appreciation for the taste of quality. Conveniently available in bottles and cans, capsules and sachets, good tasting tea converts millions of commodity drinkers to more premium paying customers annually. Now is not the time to abandon tea. It is critical the industry invest in making better tea. Trend two: the oversupply of mediocre quality tea depresses prices. There's a big market, and there always will be, for dust and fannings used to make 3-cent tea bags. But there is no long term business advantage in solely producing commodity CTC. This is because in every tea growing nation, producers are far too eager to increase the amount of tea they pluck, leading to oversupply. This will continue through 2030 when climate change, competition for land, and the cost of production begin to limit output below demand, forcing prices higher and compelling many growers by 2050 to abandon labor intensive tea. The market for tea in developed countries will not expand significantly. There are simply too many beverages competing for limited share of throat. A decline in prices does not have a significant effect on the quantity demanded. In difficult economic times, lower income households may trade down to less expensive tea, but volume growth in developed countries is flat. Revenue from tea will continue rising. In the decades to 2050, the trend towards premiumization will split suppliers into those favoring automation, mechanization, and scale, and those producing artisanal tea in smaller quantities. To reverse oversupply, tea producing countries should develop their local markets. Those countries that have done so earn far more revenue from domestic sales than from tea exports. In Europe and North America, declining prices do not have a significant effect on the quantity demanded. In contrast, domestic markets in the tea lands, led by India, expanded significantly since the 1930s. India consumed 10 million pounds of tea in 2000 and 1905 and 18 million pounds by 1910. The British then aggressively began promoting tea in railways and fairs, giving it away free to boost consumption, which reached 50 million pounds during the 1920s. Consumption doubled in the 1930s to 100 million pounds and doubled again and doubled again. Today, India consumes 185 million pounds of tea a month, a billion kilos last year. China drinks 40% of the world's tea, but volume is deceptive. China's per capita tea consumption is far less than the UK. At current prices, however, spring teas from China are selling for 1,000 per kilo. Inexpensive teas sell for 250 per kilo, and mid-range teas sell for 500 per kilo. As a result, China's domestic tea market is valued at $92 billion. The Chinese exported only 2 billion worth of tea in 2020. Kenya and East African producers, Vietnam, Chile, and Argentina, and Sri Lanka generate significant foreign exchange earnings from exports, but domestic consumption is minimal, representing a growth opportunity. Trend 4: fast changing consumer behavior. The immediate threat to tea is the fear of contagion that lowers production, disrupts transport, and has crippled food service operations. The impact of lockdowns dramatically altered how consumers view out of home consumption. Food service accounts for 20% of tea revenue, but the shift to home consumption, the retail pivot to online transactions, and the emphasis on tea's immunity boosting characteristics are far more disruptive than restaurant and office closures. Food service sales are trending to pre pandemic levels as vaccines enable a return to normal. But attrition means that tea revenue from food service will remain below pre pandemic levels for many years. The pandemic permanently diverted revenue from traditional retail to AI assisted personalized subscription services, vendors investing in online tea clubs, those that offer expanded offerings and features, and those featuring sophisticated courses in tea appreciation are now generating revenue from services, not just their product. Integrating education with hands on virtual preparation courses is paving the way for retailers to master experiential tea. Changing climate is a much greater but less immediate threat. As temperatures rise, pests multiply, and rainfall becomes erratic, it begins a cycle of scarcity. Competition for land and higher costs are going to limit the overall production of tea. The long term impacts are unknown, but demand for tea will remain steady, and steep increases in prices will depress sales in favor of bottled water, while enriching growers as it makes others more resourceful, and drives millions of smallholders into agricultural pursuits. The way forward, there will always be droughts and floods, quakes and landslides in the headlines. But headlines of the next decade will also reveal commodity growers have mechanized and built factories that are largely automated. Production, processing, and packaging will be integrated to add value. Significant volumes of tea will be sold direct via brands that are authentic, certified, and well marketed. Thousands of smallholders will acquire land and become rural entrepreneurs, providing quality leaf and banding together in cooperative ventures that finance modern factories. Blending, packaging, and cooperative marketing will become closer to origin. Distribution will be closely tied to online platforms and subscription services that offer greater variety globally. Tea Craft's Nigel Milliken predicts that, quote, specialty tea suppliers will walk their own path, emphasizing sustainable techniques, unique terroir, quality pluck and processing, and sophisticated marketing to justify their prices. Consumers will welcome these adaptations and innovations that make tea more convenient and readily available. And tea will retain its status as the most consumed prepared beverage in the world.